A soldier and his little daughter were driven out of their home by his wife and her lover. 3 months later, the two betrayers knelt and begged right in front of the very house that once cast them out. But what the soldier did next left everyone stunned. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" The voice echoed through the still barracks of Fort Irwin, a base standing alone in the vast California desert. Golden sand stretched endlessly, the wind howled, carrying a searing heat that seemed to scorch the air itself. Inside the cold gray walls, the metallic clink of weapons and the steady rasp of cloth against gun barrels beat like a familiar rhythm. Sitting at the edge of a table was Jake Miller, 42 years old, tall and rugged, his skin weathered by 5 relentless years under the desert sun. His square jaw didn't make him handsome in the usual way, but there was a solidness about him that made people trust him instinctively. He spoke little discipline, etched deep into his bones, yet behind that closed-off exterior was a heart that ached for his home in Oakwood, where Rebecca, his wife, and Lily, his 9-year-old daughter, were waiting. Jake carefully cleaned the parts of his rifle, each motion precise, steady, but his gaze often drifted to the window where the wind lifted swirls of sand in the distance. For him, each day in camp was like a page torn from a calendar. Homecoming was now only a matter of hours. On the iron bed beside him sat an old family photo standing upright. Lily's smile beamed bright Rebecca's gentle face beside her. Jake touched the small face in the picture with his fingertip, a fleeting smile crossing his lips, tender yet restrained. That image had been the anchor that carried him through 5 harsh years far from home. Looking at that picture again, a voice teased lightly. Jake glanced up. James Porter, his 40-year-old comrade, tall and broad-shouldered, his sun-browned face warm with an easy smile, set down his tray of food and sat beside him. "How much longer before you head home?" Porter asked. Jake gave a small nod, a quick smile flickering. 2 days. That's it." Porter whistled low and shook his head. "Lucky man. I've got more than a month left. Have an ice-cold beer for me when you get back, will you?" Jake didn't answer, just smirked faintly. Porter followed his glance to the photo, his eyes softening. "She looks a lot like you. Bet she misses you." Jake stayed silent. He set the rifle on the rack, folded the cloth neatly, then pulled a small box from his pack wrapped with care. Inside lay a cloth doll and a light blue dress, the gift he had been saving for months. Just picturing Lily laughing and twirling in the dress eased the tightness in his chest. That final night at the base, Jake was summoned to the commander's office. Captain Harris, well past 50, hair-silvered face stern but eyes warm, watched Jake standing straight at attention. He placed a firm hand on Jake's shoulder. "You've served well, Jake. 5 years is no small thing. Here's your reward." He laid a thick envelope on the desk. "It won't make you rich, but it's enough to start over. Build a decent home. Take care of your little girl." Jake gripped the envelope tightly. "Thank you, sir." Harris held his gaze, his voice measured but strong. "When you leave this base, what matters isn't how you lived here, but how you live out there. Family takes more discipline than any camp, but I believe you'll manage." Jake's eyes shone. He walked out, lifted his head to the star-strewn desert sky. For the first time in years, those lights brought him real comfort. That night the barracks buzzed with laughter, farewells mixed with jokes. Porter slipped a small note with his phone number into Jake's hand. "Call me if you need anything. You saved my life once, I haven't forgotten." Jake nodded, slid the note into his wallet. He quietly packed his belongings, folded each uniform, and placed Lily's gift box on top. Every movement was deliberate, as though preparing for a mission. This time, the mission was simple: to return home. He sat on the bed, eyes drawn again to the photo. Rebecca's gentle face, Lily's carefree smile, images that had carried him through endless patrols, sleepless nights, and scorching desert days. They were his only anchor. In a husky whisper, heavy with emotion, he murmured, "Just one more day. Tomorrow everything changes." Yet on that last night in camp, every familiar sound, The stomp of boots on concrete, the distant bugle calls echoed as reminders that he was leaving this place behind. Jake lay down but couldn't sleep. In his mind, he saw Lily running into his arms so vivid it made him chuckle softly. He remembered the old house, the porch where she once drew, with chalk the smell of Rebecca's weekend baking. Still, a faint unease stirred. 5 years was a long time. How had things been for those left behind? He pushed the thought aside, trusting love to keep everything intact. The clock ticked away. Only a few hours left before the transport would carry him out of the desert back to Oakwood. Jake closed his eyes, clutching the photo frame, his heart brimming with hope. He didn't know that beyond his anticipation, a storm was already waiting. A soft clink sounded. The frame slipped to the floor. The glass cracked with a thin line. Jake, already asleep, didn't notice the fracture, a silent omen of what lay ahead. Meanwhile, in Oakwood, the home that once was his haven was already changing. Rebecca Miller. 31, slender, her brown hair pinned neatly back, sat by the fireplace. The face that once radiated gentleness now bore faint weariness after years of absence. She was tender by nature, easily swayed by sweet words. The longing for a steady presence, something Jake hadn't been able to give in 5 years, left her vulnerable. Beside Rebecca sat Mark Turner, 35, of medium height, strong build, a confident smile, and eyes that always seemed to promise something. Beneath the calm exterior lurked an opportunist, ambitious and cunning, skilled at exploiting weakness to keep others bound. The firelight cast their shadows on the wall. One figure leaned, searching for support. The other smiled with quiet triumph. Far away, Jake still believed tomorrow would bring happiness. But inside his very own home, a scheme was already taking shape. Rebecca leaned her head against Mark's shoulder, her hand still clutching the half-finished glass of wine. The room seemed warm, but inside her lingered a heavy weight she couldn't quite name. On the coffee table lay a thick folder, the crisp legal pages glinting under the light. Mark flipped through a few sheets, his confident smile spreading wider. "It's all done," he murmured, a hint of triumph in his voice. "This house is ours now." Rebecca slowly turned the glass in her hand, her gaze resting on the lines of legal text. A flicker of hesitation crossed her face. "But Jake still sends money regularly." "He believes I need it." Mark set the folder down, tilted his head, and locked eyes with her, his hand gently tightening around hers. "Rebecca, you don't have to worry anymore. These past 5 years, who's really been here for you, I promise you much more than that. This is only the beginning." His words seeped in, pouring into the emptiness she had carried all those years. Rebecca swallowed her resistance, giving way to a fragile sense of comfort. Suddenly, Mark's phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with a short message. He froze for a split second, his lips pressing tight. In an instant, he flipped the phone face down and looked up with a calm smile. Rebecca frowned. "Who was that? Nothing," he replied smoothly, voice soft. "Work. Let's not let small things spoil our evening." He poured more wine and offered her the glass. Rebecca took it, her hand brushing his, but her thoughts were restless. For a fleeting moment, Jake's letters from the desert came to mind, then slowly receded, drowned out by the promises right before her. Upstairs, Lily sat on her bed with her knees pulled close. The room, once full of laughter, now held only a few worn toys. She didn't fully understand the meaning of the papers downstairs, but the strange laughter of her mother and the unfamiliar man's voice unsettled her deeply. The door stood slightly ajar, letting fragments of conversation drift in. Lily stayed still, listening, her wide eyes tense. She reached for the photo beside her pillow, a picture of her with her father. Jake's face in the photo was kind and steady, a stark contrast to the sounds echoing up from the living room. She hugged the picture tight to her chest, her lips pressed together, a flicker of clumsy determination lighting her young eyes. In the living room, Mark rose to draw the curtains, the fire casting sharp lines across his face. His phone buzzed again. He snatched it up and stepped out onto the porch. His voice dropped low and urgent. "I'll pay. I just need more time. Don't do anything reckless. This house will cover everything." He ended the call, drew in a deep breath, then walked back inside, his tension hidden behind a practiced mask. Sitting down, he took Rebecca's hand, his voice soft as a breeze. "I'm sorry, just a difficult client. Nothing to worry about. Trust me, everything will be fine." Rebecca nodded, though in her eyes the unease hadn't faded. Upstairs, Lily pressed her ear to the wall, her heart pounding with each word that drifted up. "This house is ours. Jake isn't here, don't worry anymore." Every phrase etched itself into her memory like a cut. Fear and anger welled inside her, leaving her eyes rimmed red. The living room still glowed with firelight. Rebecca leaned fully against Mark's shoulder, her eyes half closed as if she wanted to believe his words. But upstairs, a small heart trembled, desperate for something to hold on to. The fire cracked suddenly, as if punctuating the falsehood in the room. Mark's phone buzzed again, the screen flashing with a new message. "If you don't pay on time, that house won't save you." Rebecca lifted her head, but Mark quickly flipped the phone over, forcing a smile. For a brief moment, a glint of unease flashed in his eyes before he buried it again. Upstairs, Lily clutched the photo of her father tighter, whispering to herself like a promise, "Daddy will come home. I'll tell him everything." Late the next afternoon, the bus rolled to its final stop in the town of Oakwood. The sky had turned a deep shade of orange, the last rays of sunlight spilling across the brick-paved sidewalks. Jake stepped down, the old backpack heavy on his shoulder. He had barely slept the night before, his mind replaying the image of his daughter running into his arms, the sound of her calling Daddy filling the familiar house. The road leading home stretched out before him. The trees still stood where they always had, though their branches were thinner now, the trunks scarred by time. The sidewalk, once marked by his and Lily's playful footsteps, now bore small cracks. The air seemed peaceful, but inside, Jake, something felt out of place. He passed the house of Mr. Anderson, his familiar neighbor, a thin man in his 60s with a head of white hair, crouched over trimming his potted plants in the front yard. Hearing footsteps, the old man looked up. For a split second, his eyes froze in sheer shock, as though he were seeing the ghost of someone long gone. But just as quickly, Mr. Anderson dropped his gaze, his hand trembling slightly on the shears. Jake hesitated. "Mr. Anderson," he began, but the greeting died in his throat. That evasive look had spoken more than any words could. A sharp ache pierced Jake's chest. He tightened the strap of his pack and walked on a heavy sense of foreboding, building inside him. At last, his house came into view. The same old roof, the familiar porch, but the windows glowed brighter than he remembered, spilling out a warmth that felt strangely foreign. From inside, laughter rang out, not the kind of sound he had longed for. Mixed in were the tones of a man's deep, unfamiliar voice and the clinking of glasses. Jake drew closer, the excitement in his chest turning to a dull, throbbing pain. He stopped at the window and looked in. The sight hit him like a blow. He hadn't braced for a lavish dinner, spread wine roast meat pastries. Rebecca sat close beside a man, their hands entwined, laughing, feeding each other. In the corner of the room, Lily sat silently on a small plastic chair. In front of her was only a bowl of plain rice and a few cold vegetables. Unlike the joy around her, her eyes were downcast, her young face closed off. Jake gripped the window frame, his hand shaking. His heart plummeted. All the days of longing, all the times he imagined their reunion shattered in that instant. He drew in a long breath and walked straight to the front door. The hinges creaked softly as it swung open. Every face in the room turned toward him. The backpack slipped off Jake's shoulder and thudded heavily onto the wooden floor, the sound carrying like a symbol of crushed hope. Rebecca froze, her face stiff with shock. The man Mark stopped mid-motion, his hand still hovering with a half-cut piece of meat. Lily was the first to move. Her wide eyes opened even larger, her small body trembling. Tears welled instantly. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice breaking into a fragile, trembling sound. Jake's gaze locked on his daughter. He saw the loneliness etched into her tiny shoulders, saw the cruel contrast between the feast at the table and the meager bowl before her. The room fell heavy with silence. The laughter from moments ago evaporated, replaced by an unbearable stillness. Rebecca stood, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Mark arched his brow, his expression caught for a moment in awkwardness before he quickly masked it with a false calm. Jake took a step forward, his eyes never leaving his daughter. Lily. His voice was hoarse, loaded with pain, helplessness, and regret for being gone so long. A father had come home carrying his faith in family, only to be met with the raw truth of betrayal. A mother bowed her head, unable to meet his eyes. A stranger sat in his house feigning possession, and a child sat there carrying a loneliness too deep for words. Lily burst into sobs, running toward Jake, her small arms outstretched and trembling. In a flash, Rebecca hurried forward to block her, and Mark jumped to his feet. The room had become a silent battlefield, every hidden conflict teetering on the edge of eruption. The old backpack lay sprawled across the wooden floor as if it had fallen to mark the boundary between past and present. Its thud silenced the entire room. No more clinking silverware, no more laughter, only a heavy void closing in. Jake stood frozen, his eyes blazing. For a moment his face went rigid, then shock gave way to fury building with every breath. He raised his hand, pointing straight at the strange man who had just been sitting beside Rebecca. His voice was low, but cold enough to cut through the air. "Who is he?" Mark stiffened, the smile still clinging to his lips, suddenly twisting out of shape. He shot to his feet, retreating half a step as though dodging a blow. His hands clasped loosely at his chest in a show of calm, but his eyes glimmered with challenge, weighing whether to confront or feign submission. Rebecca faltered, her lips parting without words. She glanced at Mark, then at Jake, panic flickering in her eyes. But within a few breaths, she seemed to gather herself, straining to build a wall of composure. Rebecca drew in a breath, her tone hardening to mask her fear. "Jake, what are you doing here, showing up out of nowhere? Where were you these 5 years? You abandoned me, abandoned our daughter. What right do you have to question me now?" Her voice trembled at the end, but she pressed down, forcing strength over hesitation. Jake clenched his jaw. His eyes shifted to the corner of the room where Lily stood, pressed against the dining table. Her small hands twisted together, her eyes swollen red. The sight stabbed at him like a knife. His voice cracked sharp, aimed at Rebecca. "You say you've suffered so much that you let our daughter sit with nothing but a bowl of plain rice while this table overflows with wine and meat. Is this what you call taking care of her?" Lily trembled, tears streaking down her cheeks. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing aloud, and Jake's heart clenched painfully. He stepped forward, eyes locked on Mark. His voice roared across the room, "What have you done to my family?" Mark shrugged, lifting both hands as though innocent. Yet the curl of his lips betrayed him, his tone dripping with mockery. "Calm down, soldier. You've come back, but this house isn't yours anymore." Rebecca made her choice. A man gone 5 years has no voice here. Jake's fists tightened, his chest heaved, his gaze burning hot enough to scorch the distance between them. Rebecca hurried to cut in, as though terrified the confrontation would erupt into violence. She rushed to the coffee table drawer, yanked out a bundle of papers. Her hands shook as her eyes darted toward Jake. Then, as if to lay bare the undeniable, she suddenly flung the stack onto the floor. A few sheets slid to Jake's feet. "Look, this is the truth. Divorce papers, the deed to this house, all legal. This house is mine now. You're just an outsider." The sound of paper hitting wood echoed dry and sharp. Jake bent down. Blue ink blurred in his vision. 5 endless years of waiting for reunion, all reduced to a pile of cold documents. He looked up, eyes bloodshot, throat locked tight. Words failed him. Only ragged breaths remained. Lily broke down, sobbing uncontrollably, tears streaming as she bolted toward her father, but Rebecca's arm shot out on instinct, blocking her path. "Lily, don't!" The words burst out unsteady, but that act of denial only made the child cry harder. Jake saw her shaking with fear, and his heart shattered. The room had turned into a battlefield. Papers scattered like blades, words flung like artillery, and Lily bore the wounds. Jake stood silent for a long moment. He knew if he stayed, his daughter would only witness more pain she should never see. He stooped, picked up the old backpack, then laid a gentle hand on her small head. His voice was low broken but firm. "Don't be afraid. Daddy's here." He turned. Each step was heavy but resolute. A soldier who had crossed battlefields now chose retreat not out of cowardice, but to shield his child's fragile heart. Silence was not weakness, but strength, a way to preserve her one sliver of peace. Jake's hand had barely touched the doorknob when behind him a mocking laugh rang out. Mark crossed his arms, his voice hissing through clenched teeth. "You're too late, Jake. The man who lost everything still can't see the truth. When you've lost, you'd better learn to accept it." Jake froze. His hand gripped the knob tighter, his knuckles whitening. His chest heaved, ready to explode. The door hadn't yet opened, but inside him, a storm was already raging, warning that what came next would be anything but calm. The door closed behind them, shutting out the mocking laughter and the cold stack of papers. Jake held Lily's hand tightly. Her small fingers trembled, yet clung to her father as if letting go would make him disappear. He squeezed back and kept walking, never looking over his shoulder. Just beyond the fence, Mr. Anderson was waiting. He hadn't come by chance. The moment he'd heard the raised voices next door, he had set down his shears, walked to the gate, and sensed that something was terribly wrong. A man in his 60s, thin with unruly silver hair and an old pair of clippers still in his hand, his eyes were deep and sorrowful. As the father and daughter drew near, he spoke quietly, his voice low but steady. "Come inside with me. I can't let the two of you wander around like this." Jake hesitated, wanting to refuse so as not to impose, but when he glanced down and saw Lily's swollen, fearful eyes, he could only nod. They followed him across the fence. The Anderson home stood opposite Jake, simple and still. The scent of old wood lingered. A faded sweater hung in the hallway, and in the living room, a grandfather clock ticked with patient rhythm. On the walls, a few yellowed photographs told of days when family once filled the house, days long since claimed by time. The air here was nothing like the suffocating weight Jake had just left behind. Here, there was sincerity, safety. Mr. Anderson headed straight to the kitchen. In no time, he placed 2 steaming plates of rice on the table, with nothing more than fried eggs and boiled greens. Pulling out a chair, he gestured, "Eat something. I'll give you two some time alone." Then he quietly closed the door and stepped out into the garden. The room settled into silence. Jake sat across from his daughter. He wanted to say so much, to ask so much, yet the words stuck in his throat. At last, he chose a question that seemed almost trivial. How's school been lately?" he asked softly. Not because he cared only about her studies, but because he feared pressing into the wounds she carried. That everyday question was the only way he could break the silence. Lily toyed with her spoon, her eyes glistening. She bit her lip, not answering. A moment later, tears slid down her cheeks. Then, unable to hold back any longer, she burst out crying and flung herself into his arms. "I don't want to stay with Mom anymore. I'm so scared of him. I just want to be with you." Daddy Jake froze. Arms that had been so steady in the field now trembled as he wrapped her tight. Those innocent words pierced the deepest part of him where he had hidden away every weakness. "Daddy's home now, Lily," he whispered. "I'm not going anywhere again." Father and daughter sat close, tears mingling, no more words needed. The walls Jake had built in his heart, walls of discipline and duty, began to crack. For the first time in years, he felt warmth. The door creaked open. Mr. Anderson returned holding a small tray. On it were a few homemade pastries and 2 cups of warm milk. He didn't say much, just set them down. His eyes lingered on the sight of father and daughter clinging to each other before resting on Jake. Then with a gentle squeeze on Jake's shoulder, he offered silent comfort. Jake looked down at the pastries. They were the very same kind Lily had always been given whenever she came by this house. Now they sat before them again alongside a simple glass of milk, carrying with them a piece so overwhelming it brought tears to his eyes. He picked one up. His vision blurred, and for the first time in years of forcing himself to be strong, Jake let the tears fall. Lily looked up and gently wiped them away with her small hand. Her voice trembled. "Don't cry, Daddy. You have me." A soldier who had crossed countless battlefields, thought unbreakable, now bent in the arms of his little girl. Her innocent gaze had become the strongest fortress he could lean on. In that moment, Jake knew he wasn't alone. Betrayal and loss were real, but so was the refuge he still had his daughter and the quiet help of a loyal neighbor. Just as their simple meal settled into calm, sudden pounding, rattled the front door. It wasn't the friendly knock of a neighbor, but a hurried, urgent rhythm. Mr. Anderson shot a glance at Jake, his expression tightening. He set his hand on the doorknob but didn't open it. Outside, beneath the yellow porch light, the shadow of a tall man loomed, blurred and still. The knocking came again, louder this time. Jake gripped his daughter's hand tighter, his heartbeat quickening. He knew that once that door opened, life would take another turn, and it would be anything but peaceful. The knocking at the door last night turned out to be nothing serious. It was only Mr. Turner from down the street, a man known for keeping a close eye on his neighbors stopping by because he'd heard the noise. Mr. Anderson stood on the porch blocking the way, offering a disarming smile. "It's nothing, just a little misunderstanding. It's late, go on home and get some rest." The door closed, but in Jake's heart, another wound opened. He sat silently in the chair listening to the neighbor's footsteps fade. That knock was like a reminder his private matters were no longer private. The whole block had begun to whisper. Shame rose within him, but instead of making him hide it, lashed his pride like a whip, driving him to his feet. The next morning, the guest room in Anderson's home was filled with soft light. Jake woke to find Lily still curled beneath the blanket, yesterday's tear stains faintly marking her face. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead, his chest heavy with sorrow. 5 long years away from home, he had imagined returning to open arms. Instead, the beginning had been nothing but ruthless breaking. In the kitchen, the light clink of pans rang out. Mr. Anderson was bent over the stove. The simple smell of fried eggs rose warmly through the air. The gaunt man set down a steaming plate on the table, his voice low but steady. "Sit down. Eat something first, then we'll talk." Jake pulled out a chair for Lily. She ate slowly in tiny bites, but after a long night, her eyes began to brighten again. Jake watched her, his heart twisting. He knew if he stayed silent, his daughter would be the one to pay the price for his surrender. It was a simple breakfast, yet for Jake it felt like the starting point of a new battle. After the meal, Jake decided to return to the old house. He refused to leave empty-handed to let Rebecca believe she could erase him so easily. The iron gate hung slightly ajar. As he approached, the door swung open. Rebecca appeared, her hair loose and messy, surprise flashing briefly in her eyes before hardening into ice. Behind her, Mark strolled into the yard, shirt unbuttoned, swirling a cup of coffee as though savoring a leisurely morning. Rebecca folded her arms across her chest, standing firmly on the porch. Her voice was sharp-cutting. "So you came back? Didn't I throw you out yesterday, or are you here to fight over this house?" Jake's voice was low, steady, his gaze unflinching. "I just came to collect my things. And my daughter's." Rebecca let out a harsh, brittle laugh. She turned her back and walked inside, but not before tossing out a parting shot. "Your things. There's nothing here that belongs to you anymore." Moments later, she returned, dragging a worn, shabby bag. She didn't bother handing it over. She dropped it onto the step as if discarding trash. Dust puffed up as it hit the ground. A few faded clothes and Lily's broken toys spilled out. Rebecca crossed her arms again, her eyes sliding away, though her voice stayed cold. "There. Take it all. As for this house, consider it payment for the last 5 years you left me." Jake froze. He bent down, gripping the bag so tightly the veins stood out in his hands. Mark stepped forward, sipping his coffee with deliberate calm before sneering. His words were drawn out, dripping with mockery. "Look at you. A soldier, once so tough, now tossed out by his wife. No home, no wife, nothing left but a pitiful daughter clinging to your side. A loser ought to learn his place." Each word struck directly at Jake's pride. His throat closed tight. For an instant, he wanted to lash out, to pour out every bit of fury bottled inside. but he held back. One more outburst and the neighbors would swarm again. Everything would be laid bare. And then Lily's shame, Lily's pain would only deepen. He drew in a long breath and turned away. His steps were heavy, but in his chest a fire had ignited. A man who had marched across battlefields was now cast out by his own wife like excess baggage. The humiliation did not crush him. It hardened into resolve to win back justice. Back at Anderson's house, Jake set the old bag down in the corner. He sank into a chair, eyes staring far away. Lily came to sit beside him, her small hand resting gently on his. Her quiet presence was a wordless reminder he could not give up. Jake brushed Lily's hair back, adjusted the little backpack on her shoulders. At the door, Mr. Anderson handed her a tin of cookies. "Take these for your break, Lily." Jake walked his daughter to the school gate. Just before stepping inside, she tugged at his sleeve, her small voice trembling. "Daddy, promise you'll pick me up." Jake nodded, bent down, and hugged her close. "I promise." He stood watching until she disappeared into the playground, then turned swiftly toward the center of town. Two names burned clear in his mind, Ryan and David. Two old comrades, the only men he could trust now. The first stop was the police station, a worn 3-story building, its sign weathered by years. Jake paused at the glass doors, drew in a steadying breath, and pushed inside. Behind the front desk, Ryan Carter, 39, tall, close-cropped hair, his uniform pressed against a sturdy frame, was bent over a report. When he looked up, his eyes widened. "Jake, it's me." Ryan shot to his feet, striding forward to grip his old friend's shoulder. "I thought you'd vanished for good. You look older, but your eyes, they're just the same." Jake gave a weary half-smile. 5 years. I just left base last week. Coming back here, it all feels familiar and strange at the same time. Ryan studied him closer, shaking his head. "I'd heard rumors you were still stuck out in the desert. Never thought I'd see you walk in here." He paused, lowering his voice. "You're back, trying to find your footing again." Jake nodded, but his gaze darkened. "Not quite. I came looking for you because I need help." "Mark Turner, have you heard of him?" At the name, Ryan stiffened. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he motioned for Jake to sit, then turned back to the desk, switching on an old computer. His fingers flew across the keys. "Turner," he muttered, scanning the screen as a long list appeared. Frowning, he pulled open a drawer and lifted out a stack of yellowed case files. Flipping through page after page, he stopped at one thick with notes. Here, Mark Turner. Debts, gambling, a few small scams. Not enough evidence to convict, but plenty of complaints. Ryan looked up, lowering his voice. "And one more thing, he's already under watch. Someone's tracking him. I'll let you know as soon as I hear more." Ryan's eyes softened with concern. "You really mean to get tangled with this man?" Jake's answer was brief. "I have my reasons." The two sat in silence for a moment. Words weren't needed. They both understood it wouldn't be simple. Jake rose, clasping Ryan's shoulder once more. "Thank you. I won't forget this." Ryan nodded firmly. "Go. I'll dig deeper into the files and the latest reports. It'll take some time, but you'll have answers soon." Jake gave a final nod and stepped out. The glass door closed behind him, leaving Ryan staring after him, worry and faith flickering in his eyes. That afternoon, Jake headed for a law office on Main Street. A neat 3-story building, its polished sign gleaming. The wooden doors opened into a serious space, the smell of paper and coffee mingling in the air. A man in a suit emerged, hair neatly combed, though streaked with silver at the temples. David Foster, 40 years old, steadfast comrade of years past, froze for a moment, then broke into a smile filled with surprise and warmth. "Jake Miller. Good Lord, 5 years. I thought you'd never come back." Jake chuckled faintly, shaking his head. Ryan said the same thing. David raised an eyebrow, crossing his arms in mock reproach. "So you went to him before me?" "You know I hate being second." Jake let out a short, tired laugh. "I ran into him at the station first. But trust me, I came to you because this is bigger than both of us." David's smile faded into seriousness, though his eyes glowed with affection. He clapped Jake on the shoulder. All right, I'll forgive you. Just remember, in the battlefield of the law, you'll need me more than anyone. Jake's voice was rough but steady. David, I need a lawyer, and you're the only one I trust. David guided him into the office paneled in wood files, stacked high but with a comforting air. He poured 2 glasses of water, sliding one across. Sit down. Tell me everything. Jake spoke slowly, his voice breaking. I came back, and the house isn't even in my name anymore. Rebecca filed for divorce long ago. Papers ready, the house and all assets shifted over to her and Mark Turner. David's brow furrowed, but Jake continued. And Lily, she eats alone in the corner, just plain rice and boiled vegetables, while they sit at the table laughing over a feast. David was silent for a moment, then set his glass down hard. Jake, you don't deserve this. And that child deserves it even less. His voice was fierce, his eyes filled with compassion. You risked your life on the battlefield, only to come home and be treated like a stranger. Jake lowered his head, hands clenched tight. I don't care about keeping anything for myself. I just want my daughter to have a real home again. David nodded sharply, unable to hide his anger. Sounds familiar. I've seen shady paperwork connected to Turner before. If those transfers were illegal, I'll drag him into court if it's the last thing I do. He slapped the file on his desk. Jake, you're not alone this time. You have me. We'll fight, but on a different battlefield. Jake looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes, gripping David's hand. You're the only one I trust. Thank you for still being here. David gripped his hand back, face resolute. Don't thank me. We made a promise out there never to abandon each other. I keep my word. Jake left David's office that afternoon with a heavy heart, but at least he now had 2 friends ready to stand beside him. Ryan and David, men who had once shared the trenches with him, would now fight alongside him on a different front. That thought steadied him, even as the road ahead remained uncertain. The next morning, in the duty room of the police station, Ryan Carter hunched over his desk. The old metal drawer screeched as he pulled it open, filled with yellowed files. One by one, he flipped through the pages, comparing names. Nothing about it was quick or easy. The outdated system forced him to double-check by hand, calling colleagues in other departments to request extra reports. Nearly an hour passed before he stopped at a name that seemed all too familiar: Mark Turner. He frowned and pulled up more data on the computer. The screen filled with information: mounting debts, gambling at multiple casinos, several fraud complaints, but not enough evidence for conviction. Ryan tapped his pen against the desk, then drew out a fresh report, updated just last week. Mark had listed the Oakwood house for sale on a real estate forum. Clear photos detailed descriptions of every room. Ryan picked up the phone and called Jake. Listen carefully. His voice dropped low. Mark isn't just holding on to the house, he's trying to sell it. If the contract goes through, the legal mess will get much worse. You wouldn't just be suing him, you'd be dragging an innocent buyer into it too. At that point, your chances of getting it back would be next to none. On the other end, Jake gripped the phone tightly, his eyes fixed on his daughter sitting at the table, halfway through coloring a picture. Splotches of red and blue stained her little hands, a reminder of the innocence Lily should have been living in instead of witnessing a broken home. He forced his voice steady. Thanks, Ryan. Keep digging. I won't let him sell that house. Meanwhile, at the law office on Main Street, David Foster spread a stack of documents across his dark wooden desk. Glasses perched on his nose, he leaned close over the papers Jake had brought him. The stamps and signatures looked legitimate, but the deeper David studied them, the more his brow furrowed. From a drawer, he pulled an old file comparing handwriting samples. Look here, David pointed. This signature's sloppy, uneven. It's not yours. Rebecca couldn't have pulled this off on her own. This has Mark written all over it. Jake sat still, his hands knotted together. His voice came slow, each word heavy as stone. David, I don't just want the house back. I want Lily safe. I won't let her grow up in a home built on lies. David dropped his pen hard onto the desk, his eyes fierce with resolve. Don't worry. I'll file a lawsuit with the forged signature as evidence. And Jake, There'll be no fee. We promised never to abandon each other. Remember, this is me keeping that promise." During the days of waiting, Jake chose to spend every moment with his daughter. He took Lily to the park, sitting beneath the old trees, reading her stories. One afternoon, he bought her a new box of crayons. The two of them sat side by side, she carefully coloring while he sketched awkward lines. Her bursts of laughter made him pause, realizing that happiness wasn't hidden in grand victories, but in simple, fleeting moments like these. At Anderson's home, Jake gave back as much as he received. He climbed onto the roof, patching leaks. The sharp smell of tar filled the air, the clang of the hammer echoing as sweat drenched his back, yet his heart felt lighter. He painted the faded fence-cleared weeds that had grown knee-high and arranged flower pots neatly along the porch. The old house seemed to come alive again. From a distance, Mr. Anderson stood quietly, nodding in approval. Hands once trained to grip a rifle were now streaked with white paint on a weathered fence. Jake realized that sometimes repairing a home was its own kind of victory. That evening, 3 men sat around the wooden kitchen table in Anderson's house. Files were scattered across the surface along with printed photos from the real estate forum and 3 steaming mugs of coffee. Ryan tapped a stack of papers. He's already contacted at least 2 agents. If we wait too long, the deal might close. We need to move fast. David tapped his pen thoughtfully. The most practical option: buy the house back. Jake, do you still have your military pension saved? Jake gave a small nod. Not much, but enough to get started, Ryan cut in. If the deed's in your name, the house won't slip to someone else? That buys us time while we push the lawsuit, David added firmly. Exactly. We'll use his own greed against him. When he tries to sell, you'll buy. At the same time, I'll file suit with the forged signature as evidence. Once the court accepts it, Turner will have nowhere to run. Jake looked at his 2 friends, his throat tightening. In that moment, it was clear on the battlefield or in everyday life, no one could stand alone. Late that night, Jake stepped out onto the porch. Yellow light spilled across the yard as a soft breeze stirred. Inside, Lily slept soundly, clutching her worn doll close. He stood still, eyes fixed on the house where Rebecca and Mark now lived. In his chest, the fire burned hot. I'll take it all back. Not for myself, but for her. Mark Turner closed the door to his study and drew the heavy curtains shut, blocking out the porch light. On the desk lay the house ownership papers neatly stacked. Rebecca sat across from him, twisting the hem of her blouse in her hands, hesitation still clouding her eyes. "Are you sure about this?" she whispered. Mark poured himself a drink, his voice smooth as honey. "I just met with a trusted agent. They've got a buyer willing to pay top dollar. With that kind of money, we'll move into a lakeside villa. Lily will finally have her own room, and you'll never have to live in this cramped little place again." Rebecca bit her lip. Years of living in want, waiting on money her husband never sent, had planted a deep longing for a spacious home. His words struck at her softest spot. Slowly, she placed the folder of documents into Mark's hands. It was a reckless decision, one that opened the door to a cruel betrayal. A few days later, in a law office on Main Street, a discreet transaction took place. The buyer arrived under the name of a small company, Papers, in Order Manor, Brisk. Rebecca, catching sight of the bright red official seal, felt reassured. Mark, meanwhile, let a sly smile slip as he scrawled his final signature. The money was transferred immediately. Mark clutched the confirmation slip, kissed Rebecca lightly on the cheek, and whispered, "It's done. Our lives are about to change." But the buyer was none other than David Foster, Jake's old friend, posing as the secret buyer. He left the office stone-faced without a wasted word. Across the street in a cafe, Jake sat watching through the window, his eyes heavy. There was no triumph in him, only bitterness. Rebecca had to fall into the trap herself if Mark's mask was ever to be torn away. In the days that followed, Mark's demeanor shifted sharply. Once smooth and affectionate, he grew cold and irritable. When Rebecca asked about the lakeside villa, he brushed her off. "Don't ask so many questions. I've got it handled." When she pressed about moving, he snapped, "Shut up. The money's mine to manage," and the money vanished quickly. First a few designer clothes and a brand new phone. Then a leased car, nights of lavish parties. Soon he plunged into gambling halls, throwing money around like a man dying of thirst. A winning hand meant imported liquor for everyone. A losing streak led him to sign off on high-interest loans. His phone buzzed constantly with threats that grew more menacing by the day. Time and again, Rebecca stood at the window watching Mark stumble home, drunk, disheveled sometimes, with a young woman at his side. Each time her heart clenched tighter. What she had traded her husband, her daughter, her home, was being squandered on a man's ruin. One night the house stood silent. Rebecca huddled alone, clutching an old wool scarf in her hands. A room that once held laughter was now hollow and still. She packed a small bag and slipped away. A damp little room at the end of the street, its walls mottled with mold and ceiling stained by rain, became her refuge. From then on, every evening, Rebecca stood at the corner gazing toward the Anderson house. Through its lit windows, she saw Jake reading beside Lily, her daughter chattering excitedly as she showed off a new drawing. The pure, bright smile on Lily's face stung Rebecca's eyes with tears. That should have been me there, she thought. Regret gnawed at her, but it was far too late to undo. While Rebecca wrestled with remorse, Mark sank deeper. Creditors came pounding at his door, slamming fists on the table, leaving notes that read, "Pay up or face the consequences." One evening he staggered to Rebecca's rented room. His frame was wasted eyes, sunken, reeking of smoke and liquor. He hammered the door with frantic fists. Rebecca's hands trembled as she opened it. Mark leaned against the wall, gasping. "Rebecca, you've got to help me. We're still us. Just give me a little more money. I'll start over, I swear." Rebecca recoiled, memories of every broken promise flooding back. Her voice shook. "How many times have you sworn that, Mark? The house is gone, the money is gone, my daughter is gone. What else can you take from me?" Mark grabbed her hand, his tone syrupy, but his eyes wild with fear. "Just one last time. If I don't pay them, they won't let me go. You don't want to see me disappear, do you?" Rebecca froze, her heart tearing in two. For the first time, she saw it not arrogance in his eyes, but raw, desperate fear. A knock echoed through Anderson's house. Jake was just straightening a stack of files on the table when he heard it. Mr. Anderson glanced out the window, his brow furrowing. Two figures stood at the gate, a man and a woman. He lowered his voice. "Jake, it's them." Jake rose and stepped out. As soon as the door cracked open, Rebecca appeared, her face gaunt, her hair in disarray. Beside her, Mark Turner looked wasted, his wrinkled shirt hanging off his shoulders, his eyes shifty. The swagger he once carried was gone. "Jake?" Rebecca's voice trembled, her hands wringing together. "Please hear me out this one time. I was wrong. I have nothing left. I just beg you. Let me see her. Let me see our little girl." Mark broke in, bowing his head, his voice hoarse. I've lost everything. Give me a way out. I swear I'll make it right." Jake stood square in the doorway, his gaze steady, his tone cold and even. "It's too late. You both chose your path. Don't expect me to believe you ever again." The air grew heavy. Rebecca broke down in sobs while Mark bit his lip, his hands trembling. Inside, Lily had heard the commotion and skipped out onto the porch, curious. "Daddy, who is it?" Her small, clear voice rang out. In that instant, something inside Mark snapped. He lunged forward, grabbing Lily's arm and yanking her close, pulling a sharp object from his pocket and pressing it against her. His voice was frantic. "Don't move! Unless you hand over the money, I won't let her go!" Rebecca shrieked, rushing toward him. "Mark, stop!" "She's my daughter. Are you insane?" "Shut up," Mark bellowed, sweat streaming down his forehead. His eyes darted wildly, his grip tightening until Lily burst into sobs, her face drained of color. In a single moment, the whole house became a battlefield of life and death, and the one caught in the crossfire was an innocent child. Jake froze. Then his voice cut through, controlled yet thunderous. "Mark, whatever you want, talk to me. Let her go." Mark shook his head violently. "Money, I know you've got it. Hand it over right now." Rebecca covered her face, sobbing uncontrollably. "Mark, let her go. Don't do this. I'm begging you." Lily trembled, her wide eyes locked on her father. Jake took a slow step forward, his hand raised. "All right, I'll give it. But you release her first." The tension stretched thin as a wire. Suddenly, Rebecca cried out, "Mark, look at me!" The shout startled him for half a heartbeat. In that instant, Jake lunged, locking onto his arm. The blade slipped from Mark's hand, grazing Jake's arm. Pain flared sharp, but he held tighter, slamming Mark down onto the porch floor with every ounce of strength. Lily screamed and bolted into her mother's embrace. Sirens blared outside, red and blue lights washing across the yard. Mr. Anderson stood by the gate, his phone still in hand, his face drawn tight. Officers swarmed in, pinning Mark to the ground and twisting his arms behind him. He thrashed and cursed, but he was helpless. Jake sank down, clutching his bleeding arm, his breath ragged. Rebecca held her daughter close, tears streaming, her eyes locked on Jake. Her voice broke. "Jake, I was blind. I have nothing left to say. I'll go with the police. But please, forgive me if only for Lily's sake." Jake gave no reply. He simply wrapped his free arm around his daughter, pulling her tight against his chest. The mother who once betrayed them now stood weeping, watching her family shatter under the hand of the very man she had chosen. The police dragged Mark away, the handcuffs clinking. Rebecca lingered a moment, then extended her hands herself, her voice choked. I'll turn myself in." As the squad car pulled away, Ryan stepped out from the passenger seat, his face grim. He came up beside Jake and murmured, "This isn't over. Turner was just the tip of it. Behind him, there's a whole dangerous crew." Jake held his daughter close, his eyes darkening. He knew then the real battle had only just begun. The courtroom was packed. Wooden benches creaked as people shifted slightly, every eye fixed on the front. Jake sat in the first row, wearing a simple suit, his face firm and unyielding. Beside him was David Foster, lawyer and friend, who had stood by him since the very beginning. In front of them sat Mark Turner, handcuffed, his face gaunt, his bloodshot eyes still trying to hold on to a shred of arrogance. Rebecca sat on the witness bench, clutching a crumpled tissue, her eyes hollow from sleepless nights. The judge struck the gavel, his voice echoing, "Court is now in session." David rose, laying out each piece of evidence with clarity. Thick case files were stacked neatly before him, every forged document, every falsified bank statement. He pointed to the screen as the clerk projected images of emails and fraudulent contracts for selling the house. "This is proof that Mark Turner used my client's name to transfer property illegally. These are the bank records showing the money was never used for a new house, but was funneled into casinos and his personal accounts. And here are police reports establishing that Mark Turner has a history of gambling fraud and mounting debt." Each piece of evidence fell like a hammer, shattering the shell of deceit Mark had built. Mark jumped to his feet, shouting, "All of this is fabricated. I was set up." The gavel came down again, forcing him back into his seat. The air was strung tight as wire. Then came Rebecca's turn. She trembled as she stood at the witness stand, her eyes brimming. Her voice was raspy but steady. All of it was orchestrated by Mark. "I followed him. I trusted him. I handed him the documents, signed papers without reading. I was wrong. I betrayed my husband and my daughter. But the truth is, Mark controlled everything." The courtroom buzzed. Rebecca lowered her head, tears streaming. Her testimony was the final blow to the wall of lies. Jake looked at her, and in his eyes there was no longer anger, only exhaustion and a trace of sorrow. He knew Rebecca had finally chosen to stand on the side of justice, though late. After hours of deliberation, the judge pronounced, "Mark Turner, you are guilty of fraud and child abduction, sentenced to 12 years in prison." The murmurs rose and fell. Mark froze, his eyes shattering as officers dragged him away. Rebecca Miller, accomplice to fraud, sentenced to 2 years probation, no prison term. The defendant cooperated and provided truthful testimony. Rebecca collapsed, tears spilling down her cheeks, yet her heart felt lighter. She had paid the price for her sins and reclaimed a fragment of conscience. Justice had been served. No one escapes the verdict of truth. A month later, Jake's old house looked transformed. The walls freshly painted a warm shade, a new wooden fence standing tall, and in the garden rows of flowers planted by Lily and Mr. Anderson. A home once steeped in shadows now breathed with life. In the living room, dinner was laid out: a steaming pot of stew, fresh-baked bread, and Lily's favorite fried eggs. Mr. Anderson sat at the head of the table. Lily chattered about school, while Jake listened, a rare smile softening his hard features. "Daddy, guess what? Today I drew a picture that won first prize in class. The teacher said I have talent." Jake ruffled her hair. "I believe you do. And from now on, you'll always have a place to call home." The room filled with laughter, a stark contrast to the tension of the months past. A broken family pieced back together through resilience, love, and justice. When dinner ended, Lily clung to her father, her bright eyes pleading. "Daddy, don't ever leave again." Jake bent down, whispering softly, "I'm not going anywhere. I'll be right here with you." Through the window, golden light spilled onto the blooming roses, the breeze gently swaying their petals. Mr. Anderson watched the father and daughter quietly, his eyes glistening. Within the warmth of that home, Jake realized the most precious thing wasn't the freshly painted walls, but the sound of his daughter's laughter echoing through every corner. That was the true sign that after all the storms, happiness had returned. Some wounds are born on the battlefield, but others fester within the home. Jake had returned, carrying the simple hope of a family, only to be met with betrayal and bitterness. Yet what kept him from breaking was the small hand of Lily, the hand that held on and reminded him love was still there. From the resilience of a soldier, we learned that strength doesn't lie in fists or battles fought outside, but in the courage to stand up for family, to defend what's right. And from Lily's innocent gaze, we learn another lesson. Sometimes it's a child's innocence that shines the brightest light, forcing adults to awaken. Rebecca and Mark chose betrayal, and the cost was losing everything, not just a house, but trust itself. Justice may arrive late, but when it comes, it misses no one. On the other hand, those who cling to honesty, even when starting from loss, will eventually find peace. Perhaps this story isn't only for soldiers returning home, but for all of us. Family is the hardest battlefield to hold, but also the one that needs our courage the most. Cherish the people who stand beside you, because sometimes a small hand reaching for yours can save your entire life.